This film had a lot of sort of, dangers, just on script level. It was like, this can turn out bad or terrible, or, or people are going to hate it for it. Every film for me is a new challenge to figure things out that I didn't know before.
Prepare your ears, humans. Happy, Sad, Confused begins now.
I'm Josh Horowitz, and today on Happy, Sad, Confused, I continue to embrace my Oppenheimer obsession with the film's brilliant cinematographer, Hoyte Van Hoytema. He is the man responsible for bringing the visions of Christopher Nolan to the very big screen in recent years. He's one of the very best at what he does. The list of credits speak for themselves. Let the right one in. Her, Interstellar, Dunkirk, Nope. It was that last film, in fact, that brought him on the podcast alongside the great Jordan Peele. This time, he's back center stage. Got the spotlight all to himself today. Hoyte Van Hoytema, welcome back to Happy, Sad, Confused. It's good to see you.
Thank you, and thank you for that introduction.
As you know by now, I'm a fan of your work. I'm in particular a fan of this work. I've had on, Chris has been on the pod for this, Emily, Killian. I'm just going to keep going down the credits until I'm Oppenheimered out, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. First, just to talk to me a little bit about do you engage with the reception? You must be so thrilled. Obviously, box office is great, but also just this is, the Barbie phenomenon's one thing, but this is kind of like a 3-hour drama to be received like this is kind of insane.
I know it is insane, and engaging with the reception, if that means that I sort of really keep track of that, how many people are watching it, etc., etc. Yes, I love sort of reading about the way that the audiences respond, and I think the numbers that flock to the screens is of course a very good indication. But in this particular case, for us, and for me, it was particularly exciting to also see how many people, or at least how interested people were in experience this film on the big screen, and for instance on analog film and on IMAX. We put always so much energy in trying to create the sort of the best experience we can give, and so in that way, to see people actually seeing that and realizing that that specific screen experience is a little special, and therefore we're going to tell our friends, we're going to tell our family, and it just keeps coming, and it's very satisfying to see that. It's a little bit like so much energy we put in there, and it just feels like, oh, people get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And to see, the record setting in terms of the IMAX and the 70 millimeter presentations. Of the 4 times I've seen it, I've been lucky enough to see it 3 times in 70 millimeter IMAX here in New York at Lincoln Square.
And let me ask you then, it is slightly different experience, isn't it?
It is. Look, I saw it on a digital projection as well, and it worked. And it's a gorgeous film in so many different respects, but you guys put so much care and love into the way it's presented. It's not,
And by the way, I absolutely don't want to be snobby or smug about it. I don't think that people should watch it, that way because we intended it to be seen that way. But I just wanted to say, like, we absolutely did our best to provide that way, and then however people watch it afterwards, we have to be happy and satisfied, right? And anyway people watch it, but a lot of blood, sweat and tears has went into sort of really investing in that very specific cinematic experience, and so if you got a chance, see it and get smitten the way I myself got smitten the first time I saw a test of IMAX running on the screen.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about, before we get into my 1,000 questions about this particular film. This is I believe your 4th collaboration in the last about decade with Christopher Nolan. Interstellar was the first one. How does that happen? Does he just cold call you and offer it to you? Do you kind of have to kind of give your presentation on what you would do with it? How did this relationship begin in the first place?
No, I think careful because Chris had been working, half of his career, or I'm saying now half of his career. Back then he had worked his career with a different cinematographer, and very consequently with Wally. And at some point, Wally started to focus more on directing, and so Chris was going to need a new partner to do his films with, and he started looking, and I think I was on a long list of amazing cinematographers that work in Hollywood. At some point, we met and we talked and we connected, and somehow there's not so much more to it. I think very much those initial meetings, they're very much about just finding some sort of common ground and some sort of common connection. And as Chris was, I had always been obsessed with analog technology, for instance. I had been very much into a very hands-on approach, the idea to capture things in camera. That has been always very important to me. But also, I think, it comes down so much to chemistry between two people. You have to spend hours and hours in a scouting van together, and you're spending more time with your working buddies than your family. So in a way, it has to flow, and it has to be nice, and it has to be good, and you have to have some sort of understanding, as well as a director, for instance, and also DP, by the way. But you're very busy on a production, and there's so many elements that you have to sort of figure out and think about and keep a strong eye over, and sometimes it's just very pleasant when you understand each other maybe a little bit more on an intuitive level as well. The lesser you need to talk about things, the easier it gets, and the less time consuming it becomes. And I always had the feeling that Chris and I, we just sort of understood each other also on a sort of an intuitive level very, very much. Is it taste? Is it just the way we've been making films? I'm not really sure, and I haven't figured it out exactly. I just know that in order for us to work together, we don't need an endless slurry of words or explanations. We pretty much on the same line.
He's obviously notorious for being a secretive filmmaker up until the script is done. I mean, I talked to this about with Cillian. Cillian had no idea he was writing Oppenheimer, and in fact was writing Oppenheimer for Cillian until it was done, and he presented it to him as such. Are you involved in a different way? Does he clue you in on what he's working on because it has to be a part and parcel of the development process? Like in this case, did you know Oppenheimer was being worked on for a while before the script was done?
No, I don't know if I knew it before or after. I'm not really sure. I just know that Chris likes to present to his co-workers. He likes to present stuff when he has figured out a decent amount of himself,
right,
for himself. He has to have a clue, not only about the way that he wants it to look, or the way he wants it to feel, but I also think he needs to have a better understanding of for instance, the physics of things. He knows that the moment that he comes out of it, there's a lot of people going to have a lot of questions. So
right.
So he's a great collaborator, but he's also somebody that feels that he needs to have answers for people that come with questions,
Sure.
And also, because these productions, they're so tight and so concise, it's also the only way to push those projects forward is to be able to provide those answers. So the moment that you go on that lunch with him and he says, okay, so we have to talk. You kind of already know, okay, when
you're pretty far down the road already.
When you get to read the script, he has figured stuff out himself. So the first read of the script is very tight, and in a way, it's very pleasant because you also understand, okay, this is not going to go through like 6 generations of changes and evolution. So the moment you start working, a line producer can start working, at first, the production designer can start working, Ruth, and start scouting. But it's very productive, and it's very sort of efficient from that moment on.
I think people would be surprised because I mean, even the length of the shoot, the length of pre-production, etc. This isn't like a 5-year production. I mean, this is for the ambition of the scope of this. It's actually, as you say, it's a pretty rigid. And I think that's probably what you're talking about. He gets it so far down the road, by the time the train is leaving the station, everyone's like, all systems go, everybody's on the same page, everyone's making the same movie.
Absolutely. And it's, of course, Chris wouldn't be Chris if everything that he comes up with is somewhat surprising or exciting or different than you would expect. At the same time, I mean, when you work more films in a row, you can see really some things that he picks up from previous productions that will find its way into the next film, etc., etc. There's some sort of a flow to that, but it's always very exciting to sort of, oh, I wonder what's going to be next, and it's always an interesting surprise.
Okay, so let's talk nuts and bolts of this one. Okay, you read the script. How much is in there in terms of the visual approach? Is it always going to be this section, the subjective, is going to be color. The Strauss sections are going to be black and white. This section is meant for IMAX. How many, like, what are the questions that still needed to be answered when you first read the script? What were the questions that were already answered for you on that first read?
The black and white is that's pure sort of Chris's. It's something that he wrote into the script. And for a very obvious reason, he needed a strong visual distinction between those two storylines. And you can start talking about looks and about are we going to make it blue? Are we going to make it green? Are we going to make it pink? I think that I have the feeling that what we tried to do a little bit with that distinction was to sort of create a different feel of it without sort of creating a look that you got very aware of, and how can you create a strong distinction in that way to get a very sort of raw and pure medium to combine with our color medium. Just made a lot of sense. It just made a lot of sense that instead of getting fancy, you kind of go back a little bit, back to basics. Or in a way, I have to say, like, everything that Chris writes in the script is kind of going to pop up in the film. So on one hand, his scripts are very tight, and they're very much they very much contain on paper what it becomes, but it doesn't. It's not overtly descriptive. He would write, for instance, scene 8, neutrons or atoms colliding into each other, creating a ray of light. A
lot of ways to do that.
He would write it much more beautiful, but
sure,
but not in a hugely descriptive way. It's you can read those scripts and you can still it triggers your imagination very much, opposed to he's not putting the images in your head. He writes the triggers that helps you create those images in your own head.
Well, I've even talked to, again, the actors, because I think a lot of people would assume watching his films over the years that there's not a lot of level of improv's the wrong word, but just looseness on set. But my sense from talking to the actors that have worked with him is there is a real collaborative spirit on set, and it's not the 300 crew members watching. It's actually a relatively small, intimate set for everybody.
And listen, as a photographer, you know, I experienced it exactly the same way. I mean, the sets feel remarkably how malleable or agile.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, they always feel like creative spaces where, you know, where we have the opportunity to respond on different energies that might occur. You know, they're not rigid. There's a lot of things that are very rigid. You know, if you want to shoot a film in 50 days, for instance, or 55 days, you know, there has to be a certain rigidness in organization and infrastructure, etc., etc.
Sure.
But once you're on the set, the people that surround the camera, it's a very small, tight group that all shares very sort of shares very strongly the same references, knows very precisely what we're doing, and at that moment, it always feels to me like, oh, this is like a gigantic, tiny student film almost, you know?
Yeah.
Where we have to sort of challenge it, we have to be able to play around, and we have to sort of try to infuse personality into the written word. And the actors, of course, get the chance to have their say and to get into that same sort of rhythm and the same flow. But also Chris and I, and we shoot on real places, and we get to fight with the weather. We get to, you know, we got to find specific solutions because of the sort of the architecture of the place, or, you know, or we have to change things around because of things that happen, you know. An actor gets, you know, food poisoning for a few mornings, or, you know, all these kind of things. You know, you have to feel that you can stay light on your feet, and you can, you know, change things around, and we constantly do. You know, I'm always surprised how, you know, how at the same time, you know, as he's considered, you know, so rigid, and this filmmaking so much is like, you know, they always become churches of films. Yeah. How light Chris is on his feet, and how intuitive he actually can work. And I wonder very often, does that come from the fact that he just has been so meticulous about that base, and he knows that, you know, whatever crazy steps we allow ourselves to make, as long as we stand on that base, you know, on that script that I've been working with, and because I've been working everything out, you know, I'm always wondering if that is what gives him so much, you know, guts and so much freedom to do all those kind of things, you know.
These IMAX cameras are notoriously weighty. Do you like to operate the camera yourself? And in these scenes, like, it strikes me watching this film, yes, the vistas are amazing. I could watch like I watched this movie and I was like, I want to see Chris Nolan, Hoyte Van Hoytema Western in New Mexico. But I also love, you know, you're in love with Cillian's face, and you, as you should be, these up close and personal moments. Yeah. Like, are you almost like feel like a screen partner with Cillian? Like, are you must be.
We are very close to each other for a lot of time, you know.
Yeah.
And Cillian is basically looking at the facade of the camera, and half of my face sort of poking on the left side, you know. He sees my left eye, which is not looking through the viewfinder, is usually sort of poking around, you know, so it must be some sort of a weird one-eyed monster that is constantly like on top of him. But you know, as it's a very intimate situation, I also think the actors are a little bit used to it, and, you know, I'm doing whatever I can to make it as little intimidating as possible, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, one myth that can easily be debunked here is, you know, you say IMAX cameras are notorious very heavy. You know, the 65 millimeter 5-perf camera, you know, that you use to you know, also enables you to record sound, is a much heavier camera. It's IMAX is a clumsy camera, and it is slightly big, but it's not crazy. It's people always, you know, throw up this myths like it's big and it's like,
right.
It's a huge thing, but effectively it's you know, I always describe it as a small minibar in a hotel, you know, something that rock stars would throw out of the windows easily, drunk in the 70s.
A little more expensive.
Yeah, a little more expensive. But and effectively it's a electromotor and a hole and a lens, you know.
Right.
It's a very rudimentary yet very precise piece of equipment, but it's a very simple piece of equipment, and it's, you know, it's as heavy as it needs to be, but it's not a crazy weird, you know, alchemistic mechanical machine in that way. It's you know, it's not as ergonomically designed as a lot of factory built sort of smaller digital cameras and so on, but you know, the weight sort of result ratio is, you know, it's very reasonable.
Fair enough. Fair enough. There is there is a mystique around those cameras. I understand it. Let me pick your brain on a couple of sequences in particular. You know, obviously the film builds to a crescendo after, like, by the end of the second act, which is, I guess, Trinity test, of course. Yeah. And that must be a sequence you're circling in the script. How do we even approach this? What were the conversations revolving around, in terms of, from your perspective, in terms of how to capture that short of detonating a bomb on your own?
No, totally. I mean, there's a lot of sequences that you circle around in the script, right? Because as I said, for instance, Chris can put like a tiny little, like 2 lines in a script that describes, for instance, you know, stars being sucked into a black hole, or you know, a chain reaction unfolds itself. You read them, and you of course you automatically have to think, okay, so what is this going to be? What are we going to do here? And as well as the Trinity test, you know, it's very much on script level. It's kind of a description of what people are seeing, you know, and those descriptions, they are also very much derived from you know, witness descriptions of, you know, of these scientists that saw this for the first time. So it's a very subjective sort of description of the event, and in a way, what was already written on the script level, there's these different stations that all sort of experience this bomb or this explosion in a different way, you know, and we're sort of getting to look over the shoulders of these scientists seeing that, and that sort of subjective point of view, that's something that, you know, that Chris was very meticulous about, that this film wanted to feel very subjective, you know. It wanted to sort of experience things the way that people would have experienced it. We wanted to be in people's heads, and we wanted to really be very tight over people's shoulders watching it, you know. Doesn't mean that the stuff that happens in front of the camera is in a way crazy, but then the next step is, you know, is kind of to take the next step, but take it as a very small little step. You know, we are not sort of magicians, you know. We're all pragmatic people that have to sort of figure things out. So we start meeting and we start figuring things out, but opposed to sort of knowing exactly how to do things, we really go step by step, and we start testing things, and we start you know, rereading the script once more, and then testing, and then seeing a test and then sort of responding on the test and then changing things slightly. And by a lot of those small steps, sort of these things start to bloom. I mean, Chris, very early, he you know, I mean, listen, he knew we can never do this. We can never reach that skill to do things for real. He also has a sort of a mandate upon himself, saying, you know, I don't want to do things just in CGI and so on. I want to see things for real. I want to figure out, you know, physical ways of doing it. So very early he kind of knew that he would end up in this sort of macro world. You know, we always worked with forged perspective a lot, but forged perspective, but then actually go even smaller and going to a macro world. You know. So Andrew Jackson and Scott Fisher, Andrew Jackson, our visual effects supervisor, Scott Fisher, our special effects supervisor, they straight away they started experimenting a lot with, you know, with science experiments, you know, with doing things on a macro level and a micro level, you know, with pieces of molten metal and miniature explosions or you know. Etc. And with all these little elements and all that little playing around over months of time, you know, you start piecing together sort of an overall image. And of course we set off some very big explosions, you know.
Right.
But everything is sort of interwoven with each other and sort of piece together to create those very subjective, you know, visions of or witness descriptions of how these things actually would have looked. We looked a lot at archive material, you know, and really picked it to pieces. Like, okay, now we cut to the other camera, and that camera looks like this, but the
right.
close-up camera really shows that. And how can we do that? Like, for instance, you know, how can we do the shockwave? And you know, very often instead of just thinking, okay, we have to create a shockwave in a desert instead of a lot of explosions, it's like, how can we tell that in a macro level, and how can we then piece that together with that shot that can get very big? So it's, yeah, for me it's super much like hobbying and engineering and just, you know, constantly telling yourself what we're going to see is going to be the sum of small elements rather
exactly.
than it's that one thing and we just have to put cameras to it and then hope that it's good, you know.
Yeah. And it's sound design, and it's cutting to the actors' reactions, and it's the music and the lack thereof, and that's the marriage. That's what cinema is. That's
a mechanism that Chris has, you know, in my eyes, have become a master of, you know, throughout, is, you know, cross-cutting in those sequences. You know, yeah. He can dissect an action sequence by piecing together all these point of views where things are seen from, and as well in time, you know, the way that time runs through a sequence like that. So that's something that is there on a script level already, and even on paper you read that sort of, you can reach a certain magnitude just by that vehicle alone, you know.
Yeah, well, it's what also makes something like this, and I know JFK has been brought up a lot, and it reminded me of it in that way too, where it's like, these are notoriously talky movies. Yes, there are bombs and there is an explosion, but these are talky movies that yet feel like intense thrillers because of the way it's edited and the music and the sound and it's the marriage of all of it. It's cinema at its best.
But there remains, of course, like you know, I mean, it's also a lot of close-ups, and they still have to look interesting, you know.
Yeah. I can only imagine when you're like reading the script and like a third of it is in a nondescript conference room and a Senate hearing room. Are you like, how am I going to make that visually arresting?
Yeah, very much so, you know. I mean, that was kind of from the beginning the biggest worry, that is, you know, classically a close-up and a wide shot, that's like a crescendo or like a single note, or
right,
you know, it's like in film, sometimes a close-up can be like a guitar solo. You know, it's like, okay, now we gotta get in there, and now we put the close-up, and in that way, you kind of yeah, you know, put the most gasoline on the fire. But right in this script, in a way, you're all the time, you know, looking in somebody's face, so you're kind of all the time forced to listen to the guitar solo in a song. It's just, the song is going to be you know, a big strung together guitar solo. and so that was of course a very big worry, is sort of creating dynamics as you are sort of, you know, as you know already, that you're going to shoot a lot of close-ups, and then a lot of things happen in the eyes, but not only happens in the eyes, but also happen beyond the eyes. You know, you have to be able to look into somebody's eyes and imagine a million things, you know, or look in somebody's eyes and, you know, understand that somebody is developing a whole new concept of looking at physics, or, you know.
No, invariably, I know. Yeah, watching films all my life, it's always like that real conundrum for a filmmaker of like someone creating artistic stuff or like scientific stuff, and like someone thinking is like the hardest thing to capture, I feel like, on film.
I totally agree, and it's a difficult one. It's very much a balancing game. But I think, you know, this film had a lot of sort of, you know, dangers, you know, just on script level. It was like, okay, this can turn out bad or terrible, or, you know, or people are going to hate it for it, you know. I mean, the information and the intellectual information that is being told by the script is very important and very interesting, and very sort of, it's really, you're instantaneously fascinated by it.
Yeah.
But, you know, visually, I mean, you can. There's a very easy way that you can sort of punch your audience to, you know, to death and into oblivion, you know, without even getting to a level where people open up for that information. So there was always that danger, and always that sort of fine balance to walk. But, you know, in perspective, you know, and Chris had. You know, he had very much faith in it, and he was in a way very strong, you know, guider in this for us, you know. But I have the feeling that once we started really shooting, and we started looking at those close-ups and at this material, and, you know, at the same time really kept our heads cool, and kept our sort of puristic approach, you know, at some point things start to vibrate, they start to sing, and things started to feel right and fall into place very much. And so gradually I very much lost my worries about it, and gradually I just understood that, you know, it's a nice symbiosis between the images, but very much the faces, and Killian and Downey, all the actors that Chris put in there, you know, and that knew exactly when to step on the brakes or step on the gas. It somehow, you know, really started to scintillate or to vibrate, you know. It really caught a good rhythm for us.
In following the reception, I'm sure you've noted, and look, I totally understand the reason for doing this, but the idea to not show the devastation in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I mean, it makes sense. And this is a subjective film. He did not witness the horror there. That was never, I assume that was never a discussion between you and Chris. That was never on a script level or anything to cut away to what happened, that tragedy there.
No, I mean, it you know, from the way that the script is put together, and the story it tells, you know, it was never really on the table. I mean, we there's very strong implications about about what it was and what it did, and very strong sort of you live through it through very much for our protagonists, right?
Yeah, the imagery of the scene, obviously his speech at Los Alamos, that conjures up what occurred.
And I think that I think Chris was just being very meticulous with living through all this stuff through the eyes of our protagonists, and not sort of create some sort of a godly overall, all telling this is what the situation was,
Right.
The situation was that situation through the eyes of Oppenheimer, and very much a lot of things that took place between Oppenheimer and Strauss, for instance. And I'm always a big proponent of experience things through your own mind as well, right? You look at something, and sometimes your own imagination is what completes an image.
Yep.
It's a very fine line and a very fine territory, and I think you have to really steer away with something like this to not become exploitatory. You have to sort of keep your audience's perception open for that own interpretation and that own understanding. You have to be very careful that you're not treating your audience like a goose that you're stuffing to get greasy duck liver. You kind of have to
take them 90% of the way and treat them with the respect that they can bring something to the table. And
exactly. And I think that people's own imagination is usually one of the most powerful tools that we have. And that's also, by the way, that's what I found super enjoyable with Oppenheimer as well. When I watched the first time, Oppenheimer, it really felt like, okay, this is a film that is not sort of in any way patronizing its audience. If anything, it's just a little bit the audience. But I also have the feeling, and when I talk to people about it and talk after it, I think people feel good about that when they come out of the theater like that.
All of his films are like that. They're overwhelming at first blush. I mean, the first time I saw it, I could probably 70% understood what I had seen. I felt it and experienced it, and each time I see it, it's richer in a different way.
But that's also why this viscerality is always so important. It's we all know that Chris's films, they're very often they're intellectually very challenging, but it's not like they're not made with an arrogance. Okay, if you don't understand it, you're not worthy. It's like there's a lot of stuff to bite yourself into, and a lot of stuff that is still left out there for you to understand. But at the same time, viscerally and emotionally, this has to work, and that's the most important. You have to at least try to make people understand things on an intuitive level, right?
Yeah.
And in this film specifically, because we are making film about a total different way of thinking of modern physics, quantum physics. It was for, at that time, it was like when art would change to abstract art, when Stravinsky started making his music, it was a whole different way of looking at the world, by sort of utilizing very different concepts, and somehow we as a filmmaker and the audience have to understand that.
Yeah.
But there's just no way that you and I, or I will not talk for you, but for myself, will even get close to understand to get an understanding of quantum physics. But
you can speak for me. It's okay. You can speak.
But yet,
Yeah, no, I
yet
get
at
it.
the
Yeah.
same time, there you are with that assignment to make an audience feel that they at least grasp a little bit of it,
Yeah.
a little bit that ungraspable sort of given, and that's kind of what we're doing, you know.
One thing on your resume that you have over Chris is you have a James Bond film on your resume. He's been on the podcast 3 times. Invariably, we end up talking about James Bond because he's an unabashed lover of all things Bond. Do you talk Bond with him? I mean, I always tease him that like he's got a Bond film in him. It's going to happen.
We talk a lot of Bond. He knows the franchise better than anybody I know.
Yeah. do you want to see him tackle a Bond film?
I work on Bond films, but Chris can actually he knows more about them than I do.
Do you know he's teased me that he has a take on a Bond film, like he knows kind of what he would do. Do you know what he would do? Has he talked to you about it?
No, nothing that he would ever tell me until he's no. I know nothing.
Would you like to see him do one?
Listen, anything that he puts his teeth in is going to be interesting and fun and a very specific take, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't anybody love to see a James Bond take from Chris? But there's same time there's like a million films that, you know, out of his hands would be magic and special, I think.
I know that the Howard Hughes script is still out there. One day perhaps he'll go back to that. It's a long career. We got a lot to go.
But you know, the most beautiful, isn't it beautiful? Like there's all these great crazy things like Bond films, and Chris, he chooses himself, and he finds a freaking book and makes a film about older men talking in rooms and makes it interesting. I think that speaks for itself.
That's badass. Somehow. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Talk to me. Do you know, I mean, obviously we're taping this in the middle of these strikes. Are you strategizing? Do you know the next gig? Are you waiting for the call?
No, I mean, we're all kind of standing by, you know.
Yeah. Do you keep in touch with Jordan? Obviously we last spoke for Nope. Do you know what he's cooking up?
I don't know.
This is exactly the way you were when
I'm exactly the wrong person to ask.
When I asked you about Oppenheimer when we were talking about Nope, you clammed up, and this is the same reverse. These two guys have you.
Yeah, but I cannot be the guy that will spill any beans. It's like that's just, you know, I just should shut up.
I promise to let you go in a minute, but I'm just curious.
I'm getting a script at some point, and then I read it, and then I'll shoot it.
Okay, there you go. That's your job. That's you know your lane. Script comes. Exactly. I know. Yeah, exactly. Are you like, what are your ambitions as a cinematographer? Do you think in terms of like, I'd like to tackle this kind of genre, a Western, a musical, a certain kind of filmmaker? Do you have a list? Like what's your, I mean, the last 15 years especially have been remarkable in terms of your journey. Do you look ahead?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I always like to put my teeth in different genres, you know. In some genres I found more interesting than other genres, and I think inherently, like, you know, for cinematographers, some genres are just more interesting, right? Because of the emphasis on visuals, etc. But you know, I don't know. I just love to make things that somehow vibe with people. I believe very much in that sort of cinema experience. I believe, you know, in people sitting in a room, you know, watching a big screen, can have a connection with the screen and with each other that is very hard to get anywhere else. And my ambition is sort of to master that language as good as I can in order to sort of provide an as strong as possible experience in the cinemas. And I think that has always been a little bit my ambition, you know. I have to do my best in order to give my sort of penny's worth of that whole. You know,
Do you think
there
there's
are other beautiful things? You know, I'm also a questioning kind of guy, and I'm also always figuring out things. And every film for me is a new challenge to figure things out that I didn't know before. And you know,
do you think there's room left in, like, look, I grew up with superheroes, but is that genre, is there any creativity left to kind of mine for you? Like, do you see that as fertile ground still for filmmakers and cinematographers, or as the well run dry a little bit?
I mean, it's running dry, but on the other hand, you know, somebody comes up with a creative take on something and can blow new life in the whole thing, you know. Right. So you know, I will not steer away from a genre like that just because the ground has run dry. For me, it's always about, you know, the creativity comes very much from, you know, that single person that has its own unique take and
right.
and comes up with their own sort of perspective on these things. And you know, I mean, we see it all the time. I mean, like last year, like Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is kind of a superhero film. I mean, we had never seen anything like it, you know.
Right.
And so yeah, there's no such thing as it running dry. The ground might run dry for sort of as a business model, you know, but
until the next great visionary comes and brings their unique stamp, right?
Exactly, and that's kind of what you have to sort of do as well as a cinematographer. You have to really find and choose those people that have a unique take on things. I mean, boy meets girl, like fall in love. That's the oldest story in the world. Yet, you know, that given has turned, you know, has become so many powerful and interesting films, you know.
Yeah.
And that's all just very dependent on, you know, the different individual takes that people have on it.
And last question for you: have you Barbenheimered, Hoyte? Have you seen Barbie? Are you curious?
I'm super curious. I haven't, because I have been traveling for the last months. But I'm very curious and I'm very excited to see it. And you know, most people that I speak to, they thought it was great. So I have to in one of these 3 days, which is probably in a week from now, I'm going to see it.
Another talented DP, Rodrigo Prieto, and
Yeah,
Greta's
wonderful.
very talented.
Incredible DP, incredible director. Yeah.
Thanks so much again for the time. This has been a real treat. I mean, this is like tip of the iceberg. I got to like 10% of what I want to talk to you about, but hopefully through this award season, we'll catch up more. As you can tell, I'm a fan of all of your, I mean, again, all your other work we could talk about too, but this one in particular, man, I don't think I've seen a film this many times in such a short span since Mad Max Fury Road. That was my last obsession. So you're in good company, and a slightly different kind of movie.
I mean, we couldn't have more happy for, you know, for the response on this film. It's been, you know, across the board amazing. So I'm super happy to talk about it. I think it's, you know, it's so much nicer to talk about something that didn't turn out to be a dud.
It did not. Enjoy the moment, enjoy the ride. I'll see you soon, I hope. Thank you, Hoyte.
Take care, Josh. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks again.
And so ends another edition of Happy, Sad, Confused. Remember to review, rate, and subscribe to this show on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm a big podcast person. I'm Daisy Ridley, and I definitely wasn't pressured to do this by Josh.